I want you all to be very careful. This is terra incognita. Many of their customs will doubtless take us by surprise. This is an extremely primitive and paranoid culture.
What does it mean, exact change?
The year is 1986, and Leonard Nimoy will be bringing a much-known character, or rather a reborn version of that character, back into the light in a popular science fiction franchise while attempting to deal with his overweight and egotistical co-star.
We'll rip open Ultra Magnus and every other Autobot until the Matrix has been destroyed.
But let's spend some time talking about Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home. Star Trek III, despite some creative failing, was still a financial success, and because the film came in early and under budget, Harve Bennett and Leonard Nimoy were the natural first choices for continuing the story, if that's what they decided to do. Another film, though, was uncertain, since sequels traditionally had worse and worse returns, because frankly, the films themselves would get worse and worse. Fortunately for Paramount, they took a chance on another one, because Star Trek IV became the big success story of the series, making far more money than any of the previous Trek films did. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Star Trek III had been locked in as far as the premise went. It had to be about bringing Spock back, as that's what the end of Wrath of Khan had promised. And, as Nimoy was directing his first film, he was under constant scrutiny and on a tight leash. The film's financial success, and at the time of release some critical success, allowed Nimoy to have the chance to tell whatever Trek story that he wanted for number 4. He felt that, coming off of 3 heavy films and 2 films with a central villain, he really wanted to have his film be something far more fun and without any real villain. And the baggage he had was that the crew had to face the consequences of desertion and of stealing and destroying the Enterprise. So at first glance, it doesn't seem terribly likely that those 2 things could go together, which is why you need to get some experienced creative people involved and really pore over your ideas, which is what they did, and produce what ranks as perhaps the most mainstream of all Star Trek films. The failure of 3 was that they had all the elements, but didn't make good use of them. In 4, they had none of the elements, but made good use of what little they had. For instance, the Klingon bird of prey was simply a way to escape from the Genesis planet, nothing more, and they did not create it with any future Star Trek film in mind. And yet, it serves perfectly the needs of the story. It can land, so it allows for direct interaction with the alien environment of the past. It has a cloak, so the locals won't see it. It's atmospheric, so it can do things you never could do with the Enterprise, like hover over water or crash into it. And it's disposable. This ship is such a perfect fit, you'd swear they made it in Star Trek III specifically to set up for Star Trek IV, where the truth is, they wisely took what they had and used it to the fullest. The final key was in bringing Nicholas Meyer back to help with the script. In addition to his famous work on the script for Wrath of Khan, Meyer had first come to Harve Bennett's attention because of his first film, which he also wrote, called Time After Time, which starred Malcolm McDowell and David Warner and was a time travel story about H.G. Wells pursuing Jack the Ripper into the present day. So Meyer not only had familiarity now with working with Star Trek, but with the film's concept as well. He would write the past scenes, and Harve Bennett would write the future ones. This is really the hardest film for me to review in my usual fashion, because what this film is about is fun, and its plot is merely an excuse to get from scene to scene. The overall problem being faced is pretty artificial and solution rather silly, but that's so in keeping with the overall tone that the audience is willing to overlook it. Almost all the jokes are genuinely funny, even now. No Tip O'Neill stuff here. And so for the most part we go along for the ride, knowing it's ridiculous but not really caring. Finally, what makes the film stand out is that McCoy, Chekhov, and Scotty all get the chance to take control for a little while, instead of just being there following orders and giving reports. There was supposed to be one for Sulu too, but there was a problem with the child actor screwing it up, so they had to cut it. With everyone getting involved in their own minor dramas, the story kept chugging forward, so that there was no time to stop and wonder, for instance, how whales can simultaneously be indigenous only to Earth, yet somehow be friends with a can of air freshener from another world. The nature of the aliens that occupy or built the whale probe is one that's open to interpretation. One thing to note is that no matter what the size of man to alien would be, the vessels and structures the probe flies past are impossible not to notice. From a view of the sheer vastness of space, many of the approaches are near misses. There's only a few possibilities for this. They have no sensors, which is suicidally dangerous. The ships only have an artificial intelligence that's too dumb to recognize other craft, even when it's right on top of them, which would be like going all the way so that the whales could talk to an auto dialer. Or the aliens know but don't care. It's been posited that in the latter case it's because the aliens are themselves aquatic beings and do not recognize humanoids as a life form worth talking to or acknowledging. Let's discuss that idea for a moment. In creating believable science fiction, an important element is having it populated by creatures and beings whose existence can be explained. By that I mean it must be understood whether it evolved naturally or was created artificially, and how it then can be that which it is. For instance, this is one of the Tac from an episode of Voyager. He's got a strip of flesh connecting his nose to his chin, one that partially obscures his mouth. You might be inclined to say, "That's unlike anything on Earth. It makes him so alien." But if so, you're missing the point about believability. Nothing on Earth exists like that because there's no advantage to it. It partially obscures an orifice that should be left open and serves no discernible purpose that would offset such a disadvantage. Such a creature wouldn't come into existence naturally, and would only be created artificially by a supremely powerful being with a very cruel sense of humor. It's alien for the sake of being alien rather than being believably alien. And worse, as David Gerald observed of such things, it's not alien, it's makeup. Generally speaking, an alien should either have an analog Earth mechanism, or if it does not, a believable way of otherwise coming into existence, whether naturally or artificially. For instance, if you came across a complex species with wheels, it's almost certainly going to be an artificially created creature because there are such severe obstacles to overcome in it developing naturally. And even in an artificial creature, it would require some careful thinking of how it could be feasible. How does a wheel develop and stay nourished when it's supposed to rotate, an act that would twist a standard blood vessel into a knot? Or avoid blood pooling because of the force of the rotation? As Dawkins put it, sudden precipitous change is an option for engineers, but in wild nature the summit of Mount Improbable can be reached only if a gradual ramp upwards from a given starting point can be found. So let's talk about these aliens and the idea that they are whales or similar creatures. In order to accomplish anything, you need one of two things: either the innate ability to do it, or a piece of technology to in some other way allow it. For instance, a spider cannot talk audibly, no matter how intelligent it were ever to get, because it does not have the biological equipment to do so. It would need a piece of technology to do that which you or I could do innately. However, the spider has no problem getting around in darkness, while our most prominent sense is restricted. To continue just as effectively as in the light, we would require a piece of technology, even if it's as simple as a burning piece of wood. Since the aliens in this film are unlikely to be perfect tubes the size of Manhattan, this is obviously a construct, and that means technology. The problem, however, relates to the inherent issues in a hypothetical species developing technology. Remember, technology only exists to deal with an obstacle we ourselves cannot overcome innately. Spiders don't use technology because there's no need to. They can survive just fine with what they have naturally. Humans as a species are intelligent tool users because those were the skills needed for us to survive. Those who were smart enough to evade predators bred. Those who could kill an animal with a stick or a bone had food to live and breed. There's a reason your dog has no thumb and sees nothing wrong with drinking out of a toilet. It didn't need those abilities to do those things. And it's that those abilities were there that allowed us to survive. For instance, your brain is about 7 times larger than it actually needs to be. You don't have opposable toes because your foot has been restructured for bipedalism, allowing your hands freedom to manipulate the world. Look at the controls of the Enterprise and you see them designed with human concepts, everything laid out for the hands, because the hands are the way we consider manipulating the world. The most you get with the rest is maybe a pair of pedals. No manipulation by toes, no moving the feet about, no wiggling your legs around. It's simply not a way we've been trained to manipulate the world. And so it isn't the idea of how to do it. We add more buttons or controls for the hands, or add another person to do more things with their hands. It's just our mindset. Now that's important because when you're an aquatic species with flippers, tool use is going to be unlikely to play a part in your survival. The closest we have out of all of them are certain dolphins that use sponges to protect their snouts while digging around the seabed for food. Cetacean brains, while large, are likely adapted to socializing for survival, while humans likely developed both in closely related ways. And the result of it is that our large brains require trade-offs. Our young are weak. We require more energy to power this massive organ. The more our brains and tool use developed, the more we relied upon them. That's why we look physically unimpressive next to the animals we'd be coexisting with in the wilds, because we specifically developed not to fight fairly. Now, this is not to say that other species must follow the human example. It's rather to illustrate how it happened with humanity, to see the forces that drove us to it. It's not enough to say smarter is better. Smarter has to give you a clear advantage over your competitors. And even with that, do you have the mindset for technology when you have no need for tool use to survive? And even if it were there, many fundamental concepts of technology are also going to be impossible, like fire and electricity. The fact that fire, which is such an essential tool of survival, is also central to the ability in shaping metals and causing chemical changes, is one of those fortunate coincidences for humans, and without which a species couldn't even get on the ground floor of technology. For an aquatic species to develop interstellar travel is highly unlikely for that reason, and for a creature that doesn't have tentacles, almost certainly impossible. That's why if you go in such a direction, you need to, as a creator, figure out these points. Perhaps the species was enslaved by a technological society, and hence has absorbed the concept, has a shared intelligence for preserving information across generations, has tentacles that can be used to manipulate their world. Is the kind of points that need to be thought out. But let's move on to the film itself. Star Trek IV, Whales is to Awesome.